more Americans are voting with their feet and with their wallets, and they're leaving higher tax, higher cost of living states like California, Illinois, New York, and New Jersey, and heading for lower cost of living, lower tax, at least for now. Unfortunately, I think that will change, as we've seen many times, countless times in the last 5 or 6 decades. Those states that are eventually low tax and low regulation eventually become high tax and high regulation. But Americans are trying to, they might not realize right now that it's stagflate and tax and lie until the system collapses, but they're at least trying to dodge the taxes and dodge the higher costs of living. And that's what we're seeing now with the data. So this new story came out literally yesterday. It's from a local New York CBS News. And the story is, goodbye Big Apple. More people are leaving New York than any other state in the US. So as the old saying goes, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. Unfortunately for New York, more people are choosing to leave the Big Apple and go anywhere but here. According to US Census data released Monday, which was a couple days ago, people are leaving New York at a faster rate than nearly any other state in the nation. For the 4th straight year, the state's population decreased as the number of residents choosing to go elsewhere outpaced the number of births, new residents moving in, and people immigrating to the Empire State. New York is one of only 10 states to see their population go down between 2018 and 2019, according to a study by the Empire Center for Public Policy. Quote, New York has lost nearly 1.4 million residents to the rest of the country since 2010, and largely as a result of this outflow, the Empire State's total population barely budged during the decade. A December 30th Empire Center release said, the cost of living in New York, the high taxes, regulations, and housing costs, and other crazy stuff from the governor of New York, the mayor of New York, de Blasio, who's going after Domino's Pizza recently, and a bunch of other shenanigans, and then local politicians like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who doesn't even care about her own constituents in her own local district, but has more pressing global issues to take care of, like people not eating hamburgers or cow farts, is probably also why New York is a mess. So the cost of living in New York, high taxes, regulations, housing costs, making it untenable to live the American dream here. And that's because of stagflate and tax and lie. And unfortunately, it's a lot of these Democrat politicians who, and the people who vote hardcore Democrat, who are voting for higher taxes and more rules and regulations. And then after things get worse or bad enough, then they leave. So at least they're realizing that it's bad with the higher taxes. Unfortunately, they're going to repeat the behavior, and this is the problem with human adults, is they tend to not learn from any of their mistakes, the majority of human adults, and they tend to repeat their behavior almost constantly. So the people raising most of the taxes, it's mostly Democrats from what I've been hearing, and it's in the hardcore Democrat states of California, Illinois, New York, and New Jersey, and no coincidence at all that's where a lot of the pension fund problems are too. Because there is so much misallocation of capital in those states with the budget and waste, fraud, corruption, and abuse. And those states, what they do is their solution to everything is raise taxes. And then eventually that starts to cause people, the regular middle class people, or people who can't handle any more tax increases, or their cost, they understand that their standard of living is being destroyed, they leave. So I have a number of other articles here since May, and this trend has been growing. So New Jersey, there was a story that came out November 27th of 2019. New Jersey did become a wasteland. 44% of residents plan to flee the state. Thanks to the highest property taxes in the nation and an unsustainable cost of living, 44% of New Jersey residents plan to leave the state in the not-so-distant future, according to a recent survey from the Garden State Initiative, or GSI, and Fairleigh Dickinson University School of Public and Global Affairs. So Martin Armstrong, I followed his work off and on for a long time, and he loves to say this. He used to, I think he was born and raised in New Jersey, and he ran his business there for a long time, before prison and after prison. And he said that his tax attorneys and tax accountants told him to not get divorced and not die in New Jersey, because that's how bad the rules are. So New Jersey is a mess, and I have some firsthand anecdotes of this. My best friend is a real estate agent here in the DC metro area, and he is getting an enormous amount of new clients from New Jersey. They are moving down here to Virginia. They tend to be more conservative, not Democrats. So the conservatives in New Jersey just cannot stand the higher cost increases, the higher taxes, all the rules and regulations. They're moving down here to Virginia. Don't rent your house out in New Jersey either. So only stop in New Jersey for some good food then. Apparently, that's the only thing. New Jersey, actually, many decades ago, it used to be low taxes and low regulation. People in New York, this was like, I think the 50s, 60s, up until the 70s or 80s. People who lived in New York used to escape the high taxes and rules and regulations in New York State. They moved to New Jersey, and now New Jersey is even worse. Because this is what humans do. Jesse says taxes will go up in Virginia next. Yeah, I totally agree. And then all the crazy gun laws. Yep. The crazy gun laws. And with our governor here in Virginia, who, by the way, he was not the guy in blackface, in my opinion, in the yearbook photo. And he still has his job. And then the lieutenant governor, Justin Fairfax, there's a lot of credible witnesses that remember a lot of details. Virginia is turning into a total mess. You can run, but the taxes will follow. Yes, eventually. It may take 10 years or 20 years to turn a lower tax state into a higher tax, higher regulation state, though. It's not going to happen overnight. So I have a bunch of stories here from the data. Not only is it U.S. Census data, it's also the moving company. So I've talked about a story or two like this in the past. U-Haul, the amount of people taking U-Hauls and packing up all their stuff in their apartment or condo or house and GTFO out of the state of California or Illinois, New York, New Jersey, and that's where a lot of the U-Hauls are leaving. They're leaving those states because U-Haul was tracking the data, but now some of the moving companies like United Van Lines and some of the others, their stories out. So this story was from May 30th, 2019. Retirees are fleeing these three states in droves. New Jersey, not only did more people leave New Jersey than any other state in 2018, but more than a third of those households cited retirement as a reason, according to data from United Van Lines. New Mexico is a hot destination for retirees, although New Mexico is cold a lot. So I'm not sure. Probably low taxes, but probably too cold for most people. It's more than 4 in 10 people moving there say retirement was a driver. New Jersey, it seems, is the last place where people want to spend their golden years. Almost 67% of all New Jersey moves were outbound last year, according to a survey from United Van Lines. So that was in 2019. If you want to read more of these articles, they'll be in the information and description section. People are also leaving Maryland and some of the other higher tax states. So more people are moving to Texas. So my listeners who are in Texas, the more people who move to Texas who are hardcore Democrats, the more likely that Texas, besides just Austin, Texas, because I hear Austin, Texas is already crazy, but the more likely that a lot more parts of Texas will turn into California. But there's a lot of, I'm a California expat, my family is. There is a lot of former California residents that have left the state of California, and they are living in Nevada, they are living in Arizona, they are living in Colorado. I've even seen California plates out here on the East Coast. I've seen a lot of California plates for the last couple of years now here in Virginia. So that's very interesting. But a lot of California so the population of California has increased a lot since I left California 20 years ago. But there are a lot of people that were born and raised in California or lived there a long time, and they're getting out, especially small businesses. Middle class and small businesses especially are leaving California. Now, there's also a lot of rich champagne socialists and limousine liberals, hypocrites, people who voted in these crazy politicians in California, these higher taxes and crazy rules and regulations and other stuff. And after they voted this stuff in with their own money, a lot of these hardcore Democrats are actually the biggest hypocrites and the largest tax dodgers. Remember how Warren Buffett was saying how he wished he would pay more taxes? Well, why didn't he just write the U.S. Treasury a check? Okay. Hint, he didn't. He didn't write the U.S. Treasury a larger check. Instead, what he did was he gets paid out of capital gains taxes and dividends. So he actually dodges taxes, even though he claims he wants to pay higher taxes. So that's how a lot of these Silicon Valley champagne socialist limousine liberals are. They're moving. They set up LLCs just like Hollywood hypocrites. The Hollywood hypocrites do this enormously. They set up LLCs in California and they're paying enormous high LLC fees per year, but they're still able to dodge taxes. A lot of their tax bills with their LLCs and other stuff. Not all parts of Florida are as expensive. Now, there is obviously with the Chapwood Inflation Index, there is stagflation all across the U.S. if you believe the Chapwood Inflation Index, and I think that's the most accurate. I've been covering that for years. Over 5 years, I've been talking about the Chapwood Inflation Index. That's what Ed Batowski created. But the cost of living in certain parts of Florida is quite a bit lower. I think the annual inflation rate in a lot of Texas is only around 8%. Over average annual inflation over the last 5 years. So that's substantially lower than the 11, 12, 13% annual inflation rates in other areas. Jesse says there's a lot of vacant homes in Florida. I have not been down in Florida in a few years, Jesse, so I could not attest to that. There was a lot of foreigners, though, Canadians and Europeans, buying retirement places in Florida. Dr. Collapse says liberals are like viruses. They move from place to place, sucking up resources, and when they have ruined that area, they move to the next. There's a lot of human beings that are like that too, not just Democrats or liberals. Not everyone's like that, obviously, but unfortunately there are a lot of people like that nowadays. The degree to which former blue state residents move to red states and continue to vote blue is exaggerated. You're a good example. I have not looked at the exact data, but I think you with one counterexample does not disprove a trend. Oh yeah, Connecticut's a lot of Connecticut. There's really no middle class in Connecticut. A lot of it's very high-end hedge fund managers and then working class and poor people. There's very little middle class left in Connecticut. There's a lot of hedge fund managers there that don't want to work in New York City because it's too crowded and too expensive. You need to leave Toronto. You can make just as much money anywhere else. Are you making your money online? Because if you're making your money online, you're anti-fragile. That's why I work so hard, so I have money coming in from different places, rather than a one paycheck 9-to-5 job. Oh, California's a mess. There's so many problems with California. I grew up there. I lived there, 16 years. From what I've heard from my friends who are still there, it's totally different. The traffic's much worse. There's a lot more people. The infrastructure's way worse than when I was there. The last I was there was around 2000. So I have all these other articles. I have, let me see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. MoneyWise did a survey on this. The states Americans are fleeing the fastest. This was from November 9th. Americans seeking a better way of life, including in retirement, are voting with their feet and their household belongings as people relocate. This is by Esther Tratner. Some states come out winners and others are big losers. United Van Lines says its latest data shows Americans on the move still favor places in the West and South, and most often want to see the Northeast and Midwest in a rearview mirror. But there are exceptions to these patterns. So states like, Rhode Island, Mississippi, Arkansas, Maine, Missouri, it's counting down from 25. So let me get into the top 10 here where people leave those states. Let's get here to the top 10. This one says California outbound moves was 54.4% for California. It's number 11. I don't know if that's right. A CNBC study ranks California last in the nation for business friendliness and 49th out of the 50 states for cost of living. That does sound right, actually. That part of it does sound right. People are leaving Michigan, 55% outbound moves. People are leaving Montana, 55% outbound moves. People are leaving Iowa, 55.5% outbound moves. Massachusetts is 7th, 55.7% outbound moves. Ohio is 6th, 56.5% outbound moves. Kansas is 5th, 58.7% outbound moves. New York is 4th, 61.5%. And remember, the census data that just came out says New York is actually increasing. Connecticut is 3 at 62% outbound moves. Illinois is 2 at 65.9%. Remember, Illinois has a really bad problem with their pension funds, and their solution, and I'm using air quotes, is to try to increase perpetual increases in property taxes on people whose whose income did not increase and whose standard of living is already declining due to stagflation and other taxes. And Illinois' solution, in air quotes, is to increase property taxes on them anyway, on the middle class and the working class. So Illinois has the second most, according to this MoneyWise article, for outbound moves at 65.9%. I think this is based on United Van Lines data. And number 1 is New Jersey at 66.8%. Oh, thank you for the super chat, Durf. I appreciate it. Jesse's from Montana. I'm sure there's good things about Montana. But the bottom line is many Americans might not realize exactly what's happening with stagflation and taxes and the lying about the government economic data and the problems in the real economy, but they're feeling the pinch with their tax bills and the rules and regulations for their businesses, their small businesses, like if they're in California, right, and they're getting hit with all these new higher minimum wage costs and all these other things. Small business owners are getting pinched really, really bad. And that's why people are leaving. That's why people are shutting businesses down. So people might not realize all the different things we talk about here, the average person, the average adult American, but they realize it with their pocketbook that their standard of living is having problems, that their costs are going up, that their taxes are going up, their cost of living is going up, their taxes are going up, and they realize that they're not getting ahead. They're not able to save as much money. You're welcome, Durf. I appreciate it. Durf says, thank you for the insight and education you provide, Jason. Thank you very much, Durf, for the kind words. I appreciate it. Well, you're welcome, and thank you. So there's about 6 or 7 different stories if you want to read this. It's a trend. I mean, you can lower your standard of you can lower your cost of living, moving to another state, maybe 20 or 30% if you downsize. Maybe there's a little bit cheaper food. But eventually some of those states that are low tax, low rules, low regulation, lower cost of living, that's going to change. I mean, you're seeing this here in Virginia now. Virginia's always, if you look at the surveys that come out from CNBC and elsewhere, Virginia's always 1 and 2 for top business states with Texas. And I have a very sneaking suspicion that in the next, 5, at most 10 years, that Virginia will no longer be number 1 or number 2 for business. Well, Peter, Virginia is basically 2 separate states now. Virginia's 2 separate states. You have Northern Virginia, which the voting bloc in Northern Virginia is very, very different than the southern or the military base portion or the southeastern portion. Southwestern, excuse me, which is where I went to college in Blacksburg, Virginia Tech area. So Virginia's now been separated into basically two separate states because of all the people over the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 decades that have moved to Northern Virginia from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. It's been mostly Democrats that have moved here. The town that I live in now, it used to actually be, when I moved here, there used to be lots of Republicans in the town I live in now, and almost all the Republicans are gone. So it's almost all the more affluent Obama Democrats that live around here now. So the demographics, the voting block has changed drastically since I moved here, especially in the last 10 years. I don't pay attention to Greg Manarino's videos. I'm friends with Greg, but I don't pay a lot of attention to his videos. He puts out a lot of I spend most of my time now doing research and making my own content. I have all these extra audiobooks I want to get to, and I don't have time to get to them right now. Yeah, Millikel, the Democrats moved in here, the affluent Democrats moved in here, and the conservatives left. That's been how Northern Virginia for decades now. The demographics of Northern Virginia are very, very different. Northern Virginia is starting to get, let's just say, not pro-business. The Fed is hiring. No, thank you. I've had some conversations with some Federal Reserve employees, and boy, were they unpleasant. Oh, Baltimore is such a mess. It's really sad what's happened in Baltimore. Baltimore is like Detroit and Chicago, San Francisco. Baltimore's probably worse than those. Baltimore's as bad as Detroit. New York is about to have fewer electoral votes than Florida. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Oh, actually, before I forget, there was 20 people, the credit card companies and debit card companies with my Patreon. I guess their credit card and debit cards got flagged for the bill. So I lost 20 Patreon account people in like 48 hours. So it's definitely, I mean, this happens every month. There's always a few, but 20 is pretty large. So if you guys are a patron, can you please check? And then you can maybe call your credit card or debit card company and tell them that you approve the charge. If it's like $5 a month or $10 a month. I know it's an inconvenience, but it would help me out. Thank you in advance for doing it. Stalemate says he wonders how many from Illinois are fleeing into Indiana and Kentucky. I think it's a pretty good percentage. I haven't looked at the census data, but I'm sure it's pretty good. But there's actually a very big amount of people from Chicago and Illinois in the Orlando area. There's a lot of Cubs fans bars there. I lived in Orlando for a year before I dropped out of law school. So there was a lot of Chicago people in Orlando area, also in Tampa, I think. So Orpheus, if you live in Toronto, the question is then, can you do your skills translator? Do you have an online business so you can leave Canada and Toronto to go somewhere cheaper? There's a lot of Canadians that are going down to Texas, not just Frank Holmes and others. There's a lot of Canadians that are leaving Canada. It's too expensive. Too cold too, but also way too expensive. Virginia's starting to go crazy with the gun laws. The governor of Virginia, he shouldn't even have a job. The governor of Virginia at this point, I don't know how he survived that yearbook scandal. he was able to convince people, the mainstream media, that he was the guy in blackface. Let me just say, I don't think he was the guy in blackface. I think he was the other guy, if you know what I'm saying. If you're familiar with that story, I'm pretty sure he was the other guy. From talking to quite a few people who are familiar with this, with the what's going on there more. Apparently, the mainstream media has decided not to cover it anymore. Just ridiculous. Wow. DJB says, 1 week shore rental at the New Jersey shore. A friend of his rented his house for a week and couldn't get them out for 3 months. Damn, that's some deadbeat tenants right there. Thanks for joining, George Gammon, at the live stream show. I appreciate it. Yeah, so Americans, a lot of adult Americans do not fully understand everything that's going on, but they understand that even if they voted for more taxes, they're getting flooded with so many taxes and rules and regulations. So if they're running a small business, that all these taxes, rules, and regulations and their standard of living is drastically being reduced. So they might not understand about the amount of inflation and the stagflation, but they see that their tax bill is going up every year and they're not growing their incomes. And that's why people are leaving. The main reason people are leaving, in my opinion, states like California, Illinois, New York, and New Jersey is a financial one. Liberals move to conservative cities and vote Democrats. I agree, James, and this is why the cities like Houston and Dallas, Texas, like inside the inner cities, are very hardcore Democrat now. The inner cities are very hardcore Democrat. Even though the state of Texas is still, there's a lot of conservatives in the suburbs, the inner cities of Houston and Dallas are both hardcore Democrat, I believe. Muddy River says the weed is high priced in Illinois, so the kid down the street will still be in business. Well, this is interesting that you brought that up. So this shows how desperate these states are, and this is why these states are legalizing marijuana and legalizing online gambling. So those, I wasn't going to talk about this, but the sports gambling companies are actually going to benefit from this because all the tax laws are being opened up. So the sports gambling companies, I think there was a merger between DraftKings and I forgot the other one. But those companies are all benefiting because these states need to collect tax revenues, and so they're allowing the sports gambling companies, these online sports gambling companies, to start opening up locations inside sports stadiums. So these states are so desperate, the state level government and the local governments are so desperate for more tax revenues because these governments haven't cut their budgets. These governments need to cut their budgets. They won't do it. They won't cut their budgets. They won't trim the fat. They're not run prudently. There's so many examples of this. There's so many examples of waste, fraud, corruption, and abuse at all levels of government in the U.S. So the politicians would rather legalize marijuana, legalize online gambling, legalize sports betting. And I think what we're going to see probably, it's already being discussed in D.C. It has not been approved yet, but it's being discussed because I've seen the stories. Is they're already discussing decriminalizing prostitution. I think you'll see prostitution probably in the next 10 years, 15 years probably be, in certain places, be decriminalized and or legalized, and then collect tax revenues from that. And this is all part of like the black market underground economy anyway, and the states figure they're so desperate for tax revenues that they're just gonna go after the tax revenues. Jesse says every member of Congress is a prostitute. Not every member. Like Ron Paul wasn't. I don't think Rand Paul is that bad. Dr. Thomas Massie is pretty good. Representative Thomas Massie is pretty good. But yeah, some of these members of Congress, it's real bad. And I'm not talking about them selling their vote to the highest bidder. I'm talking like their other activities. Here in America, we made corruption legal, James says. It's called lobbying. James, there's not lobbying in lobbying is not allowed in other countries, and there's still other forms of corruption. So the corruption, there's always different ways around what businesses or special interest groups. So lobbying is just one way for the corruption to occur. There's so many different ways. I mean, I've heard of people in Italy who are trying to start a small business like a restaurant or a small shop in Italy, and you have to pay like 5 or 6 different government agencies to get a credit card processing machine. So there's tons of different examples of corruption at all different levels in different countries. So just because the type of corruption here is lobbying doesn't mean there's not other types of corruption. There's tons of different types of corruption. I've been saying this for a long time. Corruption's in a global bull market. It's pervasive. And instead of fighting the corruption because it's too profitable for people in the governments and the people connected to the governments, instead what they do is they just raise taxes on us, on the regular people who aren't corrupt. So instead of fighting the corruption because the people in power benefit from it, they just raise taxes on us. That was a water swig. I don't want some random conspiracy theory about what that sound. That was me with a water bottle. Well, taxation is theft. Oh, thank you for the super chat, Greg. I appreciate it. Okay, so if you want to read more of these stories, there's about 6 of them. I'll put them all in the information and description section. James, you can join my Patreon. You can go to my Patreon, or there should be a super chat button if you're on your smartphone. There should be like a super chat tip smartphone. Yeah, people just need to learn to be anti-fragile. So if you're planning on moving, you might need an extra, this is just my opinion, you might need an extra online income or a side hustle, a side business. So if you're planning on leaving a state and going to a cheaper area, start moving more of your income online or developing a side hustle for extra money so you have savings, or to offset those tax increases or stagflation, currency devaluation coming. James, thank you for the super chat. $5 says legalize prostitution. Well, I am a libertarian, and with 2 consenting adults, yes. If there's consenting adults and they're of legal age and they have the ability to consent, then yes, legalize prostitution. Unfortunately, James, it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. Now, it is being discussed in D.C., but I don't know how quickly they would approve that. They are talking about decriminalizing prostitution around here. But eventually, if the governments need enough tax revenues, I mean, that might be... What other crazy vices can government legalize to get more tax revenues? So there's marijuana, there's gambling, there's casinos, there's online betting, there's sports betting... Trying to think some of the other vices that are currently illegal, besides prostitution, that governments can legalize and then tax it. Okay, now people are talking about drugs way too much here in the live chat section. As soon as I bring up prostitutes, everyone starts bringing up cocaine. Just great. Hopefully this video is not demonetized for me saying that. Already having problems growing the channel. I should have been way over 30,000 YouTube channel subscribers already. Probably we'll get there eventually. Only need like under 300 subscribers now. Oh, check If you're a podcast listener, check and make sure you're still subscribed. I'm hearing that people are being unsubscribed without their permission from my channel. Dr. Collapse, I was just joking. I'm well aware. Okay, a lot more super chats. One from Dimitri. Thank you, Dimitri. Are the move-out states more at risk of municipal defaults? How will this movement affect potential muni finances bankruptcies? We're getting close, Dimitri. Some of these municipalities in Illinois are getting really, really close. California's pretty bad. New York and New Jersey are both pretty bad. The defaults are very interesting. So the solution that the state government is saying is that just increase taxes. But these states do not have unlimited budgets. So they can still borrow for now. We're getting close to defaults, though. What most people think is that these are going to get bailouts. That's what most people think. James says I drop way too much research to be a free channel. And James, that's why I move more stuff behind my Patreon account wall. I've been moving more stuff behind the paywall there. Dimitri, New York City defaulted, if I remember correctly. Now, I wasn't born then, but I have studied this in business and in history. If I remember correctly, New York City did default in the 70s. And the bondholders got a big haircut. And there was big problems with municipal defaults then. And I'm pretty sure New York City did not get a bailout then. Okay, 1978. Okay. Yeah, offhand, that was a pretty good educated guess. Yeah, they did default in the 70s. They did not get a bailout then, but I would say that times have changed. And the politicians are way more open to bailouts, and that society, the people running things, are in favor of bailouts. Or combination of, well, in certain countries, bail-ins. Or combination of bailouts and bail-ins, because they need different ways to screw us over. So I think the route that the politicians will go now is you will have like governors of states like Illinois, New York, New Jersey, California, go to the federal government, go to Congress, and then Congress, of course, needs to go to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve will probably just end up printing it. Mini defaults shake the market. I'm not a municipal bond investor, but I wouldn't put most of my money, just my opinion, I would not put a lot of my money there. I know it's tax-free, and I know a lot of rich people love municipal bonds because they don't pay taxes on their gains. But to me, the risk of default or a haircut, I mean, what at this point, what, for an extra % or two with the default risk? For an extra % or two, it just doesn't seem like the risk reward is too good for a lot of these municipal bonds to earn a little bit of extra yield. I know it's tax-free, and a lot of rich people, upper middle class and rich people, love municipal bonds, and the municipal bond salesmen make big commissions off this, but it just doesn't, for the amount of reward there, for a little bit of extra yield, the reward, the risk that you're taking for the reward just doesn't seem worth it to me. Well, that's interesting. Dirty Bubble Rising. You should maybe email me. Do you have like an article on this about Deutsche Bank? That's interesting. You can email me that. That sounds interesting. Yeah, I think the way things are set up now, Dimitri, with municipalities is they would go to the state governments and the governor then would then go to the federal government and ask for a bailout. We're heading towards a lot of bailouts. I hope I'm wrong, but that's the way things are looking to me. Because how many people... Look, if the state of Illinois is already doing this, if the state of Illinois keeps on working class or middle class people who haven't upgraded their homes, if they keep raising property taxes... Do you think that people are going to stay in the state of Illinois? Probably not. They're going to get out as soon as they can. You can't just keep raising taxes on people. I mean, people will eventually figure it out. Well, most people will eventually figure it out. Not everyone. Who will be first? Illinois looks really, really bad because of their pension funds problems and their government budget deficits. New York and New Jersey also look bad. New York obviously has Wall Street there, so New York has a lot of capital from Wall Street, but other parts of New York's economy do not look good. New Jersey looks like, with the people moving out, New Jersey looks problematic, and California is an absolute disaster. Now, there's a lot of capital in California that's been there a very long time. So California has a lot of accumulated capital from Silicon Valley companies and Hollywood actors and the movie studios and a lot of other industries, but a lot of people have been moving money out of California, so eventually capital is going to be fleeing California. I mean, it's already to some extent happening. It's just not happening on the scale where it's going to risk California financially yet, but it probably will. So those states seem like, so New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Michigan, California, those states seem in the most jeopardy. Now, do you guys remember Meredith Whitney? She was calling for this, I want to say like 7 or 8 years ago. She was really early, and they destroyed her for it. Like, I really liked her arguments pointing out the pension fund problems, and she was just early on it. So, of course, the mainstream media just absolutely, like, grilled her. They called her names, They called her Chicken Little and a bunch of other stuff. But, I mean, eventually she was going to be right. Her math, I looked at her math. It looked really good. She was just early to it on her call there. Amazon doesn't what? These corporations, it is so easy for them to move. They move to a new city or state and they get tax breaks. They don't pay taxes. They get a big subsidy. They get a big incentive to move. It's ridiculous how much these cities or states bend over backwards for these large corporations, and these corporations don't need the tax breaks. Small business needs the tax breaks. Entrepreneurs need the tax breaks. There should be a pro-entrepreneurship tax code here in the US, where if you have capital maybe you inherited or you worked your butt off at a normal job and you have all these savings and you start a business, you shouldn't pay taxes starting that business for a long time. That you're investing to try to create a new product or service or a business for the economy, you should not be taxed on it. There should be a pro-job creation, pro-entrepreneurship tax code here in the US. It's not done. There needs to be more tax incentives for entrepreneurs and small business here in this country. Some areas have tax rebates on small businesses, but in most areas, the tax code for small businesses is not pro-small business. Yeah, it's for certain areas, some areas do have beneficial tax benefits for small business, like a small business tax credit or other perks, but the majority of areas in the U.S. do not. Virginia and Texas are considered 1 and 2 every year for pro-business states, but I'm telling you that in the near future, I don't know if it's 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, Virginia, the writing on the wall, Virginia's not going to be pro-business for that much longer. And hopefully I've gotten up to 1,000 Patreon account contributors, and then I can GTFO of here. After probably about 500 or 600 Patreon account contributors, I can get out. So that's why I'm hustling so hard to create content. Once I get up to a certain level, I can just get out of here. Okay, well, that's it for today's show. I want to thank everyone for listening to this unique content of me rant about problems with all these different states and corruption and taxes and stagflate and tax and lie. If you want to take a look at the data, at what United Van Lines is seeing in their surveys and U-Haul is seeing in their surveys with people leaving different states, I will put the links with the articles in the information and description section. But the bottom line is more Americans are waking up that their tax bill is going up, their standard of living is decreasing, and they're probably not analyzing the situation as well as someone who listens to this podcast, but they're at least realizing that if they stay in some of those higher cost of living, higher tax states, that their life is going to be a lot more difficult. So they're trying to move, and in the short term, that will probably help them a little bit. But unfortunately, a lot of these states that are lower cost of living, lower taxes, they're going to end up turning to higher taxes and more rules and regulations. The more people who left states like California, New York, and New Jersey go to those states and live there. But it's a slower process. It might take 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, but it will happen. Because remember, I cited earlier in the show, at one point decades ago, New Jersey was a very low tax, very low regulation state. A lot of New Yorkers escaped the higher taxes and rules and regulations of New York and moved to New Jersey. And now New Jersey is no longer a lower tax, lower regulation, lower cost of living state. So this is just, history does not, there's really nothing new except for new technology. History does not exactly repeat, but it does rhyme. And we're seeing that again here. Okay, so thank you to my over 200 Patreon account contributors. It was growing pretty rapidly until the 20 credit and debit card cancellations in the last 48 hours, but I'm confident that that will get fixed in the next week or so. Thank you very much to my dozen or so monthly PayPal contributors and people who tip me once in a while. It's much appreciated. So I can focus on content, research, information, and analysis just like this.